Many people are surprised to learn that a familiar logo from their childhood isn't quite what they remember. Perhaps the most striking example is the Fruit of the Loom logo. If you ask around, most people will insist that this classic clothing brand's logo once featured a cornucopia, or horn of plenty, behind the pile of fruit. There's only one problem. No official Fruit of the Loom logo has ever contained a cornucopia. This widespread collective false memory is a textbook case of the Mandela effect, a phenomenon where large groups of people share the same mistaken memory. Fruit of the Loom is a brand with a long history, and its logo has evolved over more than a century. The company's origins date back to 1851, and it officially registered its trademark 20 years later, making it one of the oldest brand trademarks still active today. From the very beginning, fruit imagery was at the heart of the brand's identity. According to company lore, the name Fruit of the Loom was inspired by a painting of fruits made by the daughter of a shopkeeper who sold the company's textiles. But who knows if that's actually true or just public relations talk to make a corporation look more folksy and relatable to consumers. The original Fruit of the Loom logo, introduced in the late 1800s, featured a colorful still life of fruits. This early logo depicted a red apple, green and purple grapes, and perhaps some smaller berries or currants, usually shown with green leaves. Throughout the 20th century, Fruit of the Loom updated its logo multiple times. For example, by the 1920s and 1930s, the logo had been refined. One version placed the fruits inside an oval shape, and later versions used a circular seal or emblem style. And yeah, just my personal view here, but this was a low point for the company in terms of aesthetics. The fruits themselves were redrawn in various styles. Some versions in the mid-20th century looked three-dimensional and shaded, while later ones became flatter and more graphic. In the 1960s, the company simplified the logo for a much cleaner look. By 1978, the logo still featured the same fruits, but with fewer highlights and a more streamlined appearance of the text. The most significant modernization came in 2003, when Fruit of the Loom introduced a new, contemporary logo design. This current logo, which is still in use today, places the familiar fruits front and center on a clean, white or transparent background with no enclosing shape. The fruit drawing was simplified into bold, solid colors suitable for digital printing, and the company name is written in a modern, easy-to-read font beneath the image. Despite these changes over the decades, one thing stayed consistent in every official iteration of the logo. There was never a cornucopia or basket depicted behind the fruit. The fruits have always appeared either freestanding or on a plain background. Fruit of the Loom itself has confirmed this history. In response to the growing confusion, the company released a visual timeline of all its logos from the first design in 1893 to the present, showing each redesign. Nowhere in that official timeline is there any horn-shaped basket. Only the fruit cluster appears in each version. Fact-checkers have also scoured old advertisements and trademark filings from the 1800s onward, and found that every authentic logo shows the fruit without a cornucopia. In short, the logo's evolution has been thoroughly documented, and at no point was a cornucopia part of the real design. So that brings us to the obvious question. If a cornucopia never existed in the Fruit of the Loom logo, why do so many people remember it so clearly? The belief in the Fruit of the Loom cornucopia is astonishingly widespread. It's not just a handful of people with hazy memories. It's a large number of individuals, across different ages and backgrounds, who will confidently describe the logo as a heap of fruit spilling out of a woven cornucopia. Personally, I remember finding out what a cornucopia was when I asked my mom what the thing behind the fruit was on the logo. This is a memory that's as clear as day. It happened in the Canadian equivalent of a TJ Maxx. While most Mandela effects have easy explanations that are simply explained by minor false memories, the Fruit of the Loom cornucopia hits differently for most people. and there's even evidence for it from before the Mandela effect became a thing. Look at this still from the 2005 movie called The Ant Bully. That's a very clear cornucopia right behind the fruit, just like we all remember it. Additionally, it's also highly unusual that everyone seems to remember the exact same cornucopia. Given that no cornucopia was ever part of the official logo, what could explain why so many of us remember one? The only logical explanation is that a bunch of us are from the cornucopia universe. But seriously, I just can't explain this one at all. Are we all the victims of the most genius long play marketing campaign ever? Or is there something more at play? Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here with a reminder to hit that subscribe button and share this video with 2 people you know. My channel is powered by all the support I get from you watching, sharing, and hitting the like button on each video I publish. On March 24, 1994, the life of 26-year-old Matt Flores was abruptly cut short in a seemingly random act of violence. Matthew Donald Flores was known as a dedicated family man and a hard-working professional. He had recently left the military life behind and was starting a new chapter at Applied Materials, a well-known technology company in Silicon Valley. Alongside his wife Denise and their newborn daughter Danielle, Matt envisioned a future filled with hope and stability. On that March morning in 1994, Matt Flores arrived at work just like any other day. It was his 9th day on the job at Applied Materials, and he had parked his rented white Chevy Corsica in the middle of the lot. Witnesses later recalled that the parking lot was busy, with roughly 20 people present at the time. Despite the bustle of activity, no one noticed anything amiss until a single shot shattered the calm. According to police reports, the shot came from behind and struck Matt in the head at point-blank range. The violence of the act was underscored by the fact that his death was almost instantaneous, leaving him with no chance to react or defend himself. A nearby witness, who had been listening to a talk show in her car, was the one who discovered his body and alerted authorities immediately. The sudden and public nature of the slaying left many onlookers and responders in shock. Paramedics arrived quickly, but there was nothing they could do for Matt. Despite the large number of witnesses, the investigation into Matt Flores' slaying was complicated by the fact that the fatal moment occurred in a blind spot of the available cameras. However, investigators did have a crucial lead: a short clip from a camera that captured the arrival and departure of an unidentified vehicle in the parking lot. This vehicle, a 2-door Ford Explorer with distinctive black trim on its lower panels, was seen entering the lot approximately 20 minutes before the shooting. The footage indicated that the Explorer had been following another car, one that bore a resemblance to Matt's rental vehicle. Moments later, and again before the shooting, the Explorer re-entered the lot in the direction of where the shooting occurred. Within seconds of the fatal moment, the Explorer was seen leaving the scene. This evidence led the police to consider the possibility that the shooter was not targeting Matt Flores specifically, but might have been aiming for someone else who was driving a similar car. The theory of mistaken identity quickly emerged as one of the leading hypotheses in the case. The slaying of Matt Flores has given rise to several theories over the years, each attempting to explain why a man with no known enemies and a promising future would be singled out. As briefly discussed a moment ago, one of the primary theories is that it was a case of mistaken identity. Investigators believe that the assailant might have been following another individual who drove a car similar to the one Matt was using. Another theory suggests that the slaying may have been a professional job. Some speculate that there could have been a connection between Flores' recent military service and his new career in Silicon Valley. Some even suggest that the slaying was linked to a disgruntled co-worker or some other rival, though there is no concrete evidence whatsoever to support these claims. There is also the possibility that the act resulted from an act of road rage or a personal dispute that escalated unexpectedly. Under this theory, Matt may not have been the one who was actually involved in the incident, even, with the suggestion being that it was again a case of mistaken identity. Perhaps the most disturbing suggestion of all is that the whole thing may have been completely random. This theory suggests that the perpetrator may have simply woken up that morning and set out to do an evil act such as this. However, despite all the speculation, the case went cold, and authorities have been very tight-lipped about any potential leads in this case. That said, the reissuance of a $100,000 reward in 2016, for instance, was a clear sign that authorities still believed in the possibility of uncovering new evidence. Henry Hudson's disappearance in the early 17th century remains one of history's most intriguing maritime mysteries. Hudson was a renowned English navigator who ventured into uncharted waters during the Age of Exploration. He made significant discoveries in North America, yet his final voyage ended in mutiny and an uncertain fate. Before his ill-fated final voyage, Henry Hudson had already made 3 notable expeditions. In 1607 and 1608, sailing for English merchants, he attempted to find a northeast passage to Asia across the Arctic, but each time his path was blocked by impenetrable ice. In 1609, now backed by the Dutch East India Company, Hudson turned westward in search of a northwest passage. He crossed the Atlantic and explored the North American coast, venturing into present-day Chesapeake Bay and Delaware Bay. He then sailed up a great river in what would later be New York. That river would later be named the Hudson River in his honor. Although he never did find a new route to Asia, Hudson became the first European to map the Hudson River, and he claimed the surrounding territory for the Netherlands. This achievement cemented his reputation as an accomplished explorer. News of Hudson's discoveries soon made him a figure of keen interest in England. Determined not to lose such a talented explorer to a rival nation, English investors quickly arranged a new expedition for Hudson under their flag. In 1610, with the backing of the Virginia Company and the British East India Company, Henry Hudson set sail once more, a voyage that would tragically be his last. Hudson's final expedition departed England in April 1610 aboard the ship Discovery. He led a crew of about 24 men, including his teenage son John. Their goal was to locate a westward route to Asia through the Arctic waters of North America. By midsummer 1610, Hudson navigated Discovery through the icy channel, now known as Hudson Strait, at the northern tip of Labrador, and entered a vast inland sea. This was Hudson's first view of what would later be called Hudson Bay. And yeah, if you haven't gathered it by now, this guy was kind of a big deal in terms of exploration. Believing this enormous bay might be the long-sought Pacific Passage, Hudson eagerly charted its coastline for months. As autumn set in without any sign of an outlet to the Pacific, the realization dawned that the bay was landlocked. In November, the Discovery became trapped by thick ice in the far south of Hudson Bay, near James Bay. Hudson and his crew were forced to winter in the unforgiving wilderness. The crew's situation over the winter of 1610 to 1611 was dire. They hauled the ship ashore and hunkered down on the desolate coast to wait for spring. Freezing temperatures, dwindling food supplies, and outbreaks of scurvy tormented the men. Morale plummeted as the starving crew grew increasingly resentful, blaming Hudson's relentless quest for a passage for their misery. By the time the ice began to thaw in June 1611, many of the men were weak, desperate, and ready to return home at any cost. Hudson, however, was not ready to abandon his mission and apparently had little to no ability to read the room, or read the deck as the situation may have been. Even after the horrible winter, he wanted to continue exploring westward once the bay cleared of ice. Most of his crew vehemently disagreed. They demanded to sail back to England immediately. This clash set the stage for a mutiny. On June 22nd, 1611, as the Discovery prepared to get underway, the disgruntled crew seized their chance to rebel. The mutineers took control of the ship and overpowered those still loyal to the captain. In the aftermath of the mutiny, the mutineers cast Henry Hudson, his son John, and a handful of loyal crew adrift in a small open boat. The rebels supplied the castaways with only minimal provisions and then cut the rope, leaving them behind in the middle of Hudson Bay. And yes, it feels odd to say they left Henry Hudson in the middle of Hudson Bay, but it is what it is. Hudson and the 8 others with him in that tiny boat were never seen again. As Hudson's abandoned boat faded from view, the Discovery, now under the mutineers' command, set sail for England. The Discovery reached England later that year, with only 8 crewmen remaining. The survivors were arrested and put on trial for the slaying of Henry Hudson, but in the end, none were punished due to lack of proof and conflicting testimonies. To put it simply, the seamen were all over the place, and no one wanted to deal with cleaning up that mess. The mutineers claimed they had simply marooned their captain, not snuffed him out. With Hudson himself missing and unable to tell his side of the story, the true events of the mutiny remained murky. What ultimately happened to Henry Hudson and the men set adrift with him remained an open question that would haunt history. The mystery of Henry Hudson's disappearance has spawned numerous theories about what happened after he was cast adrift. Because no definitive evidence of Hudson or his crew was ever found, historians and adventurers have hypothesized several possible fates. One theory suggests Hudson was never actually set adrift at all, but rather he was slain by the mutineers during the takeover. Some very suspicious evidence was noted when the Discovery returned. For instance, there were bloodstains on the deck that no one seemed to have an explanation for. And I really have to question why these seamen couldn't think up a plausible excuse for the stains during their months-long voyage back to the homeland. After all, the forensic technology at the time was, well, let's just call it limited. It's possible the mutineers concocted the story of setting Hudson loose to hide the true story. However, without bodies or eyewitnesses beyond the mutineers themselves, this theory remains speculative. Other theories propose that Hudson and his companions survived for a time after being marooned. Given their proximity to land, they might have reached the shores of James Bay. In fact, years later in 1631, explorer Thomas James reported finding the remains of a crude shelter on an island in James Bay, perhaps built by Hudson's stranded party. Some believe the castaways could have been rescued or captured by indigenous peoples, and there's actually way more evidence for this than you might think. Cree oral traditions speak of a stranded group of white men who were either captured or rescued depending on the telling. However, given the oral nature of these legends, it's unclear what time period this is referring to. French explorer Samuel de Champlain in 1613 recorded hearing of an English boy taken in by the Algonquin people after a shipwreck in the far north. Notably, in the 1950s, a stone was found in Deep River in Ontario with the initials HH and the year 1612. Adding more interest to the narrative, the stone also had the words "captive" etched into it. Notably, no one has been able to determine when this carving was actually made. Others suspect that Hudson, his son, and remaining crew simply died of exposure, given that they were left with almost no supplies. Even though this is the least interesting theory of all, it's the one I tend to prefer, since the crew members themselves openly stated they gave them very little in the way of goods to survive on. And this was the crew members' version of events trying to make themselves look at least somewhat good and reasonable under the circumstances. On the evening of July 4th, 1947, a United Airlines flight took off from Boise, Idaho, bound for Pendleton, Oregon. For over a dozen minutes, the crew of this DC-3 witnessed a series of unusual disc-like objects in the twilight skies over the Pacific Northwest. Today, the Flight 105 UFO sighting is remembered as one of the early documented accounts by professional pilots during the wave of flying disc reports that swept the United States in 1947. The summer of 1947 marked a turning point in modern ufology. Prior to that year, isolated sightings of strange aerial phenomena had been reported, but the public did not take them seriously. The phenomenon began with Kenneth Arnold's famous report on June 24, 1947, when he described a chain of bright objects flying near Mount Rainier. Arnold estimated their speed to be far beyond that of any known aircraft, and his account quickly captured the public imagination. Newspapers began using the phrase flying saucers to describe these objects, a term that stuck even as subsequent reports added variations to the descriptions. In the days and weeks that followed Arnold's sighting, hundreds of similar reports emerged from across the country. People from all walks of life, including trained military personnel and airline pilots, began to report witnessing objects that did not fit into any conventional explanation. The intense media coverage and public interest set the stage for a broader cultural phenomenon. On the evening of July 4, 1947, United Airlines Flight 105, operated by a Douglas DC-3, departed from Boise under the watchful eye of air traffic control. In a lighthearted nod to the recent media frenzy, the control tower even joked with the crew about keeping an eye out for flying saucers. In the YouTube mysteries industry, that's what we call foreshadowing. However, the humor soon turned into astonishment when the flight crew began to observe a series of unidentified objects in the darkening sky. According to the crew's later accounts, shortly after takeoff, the pilots and a flight attendant noticed 4 or 5 objects that appeared to be arranged in a loose formation. The objects were described as being flat and circular, with a smooth underside and a rougher top. One of the objects was notably larger than the others. The crew maintained radio contact with the control tower and even reported that the objects were visible for approximately 45 miles and lasting for about 10 to 15 minutes. After this time period, they abruptly vanished, shooting off into the horizon at high speeds, just like a run-of-the-mill high-altitude weather balloon. The pilots couldn't determine whether the objects were oval, saucer-like, or of another shape. The witness, who was also in the cabin, confirmed that the objects were visible from the cockpit and were not a trick of the windows. Although the passengers did not have a view of the phenomena, the professional observations of the pilots gave the sighting a weight that would influence later investigations. Soon after the Flight 105 sighting made headlines, military authorities began to take a closer look at the accounts. The United States Army Air Forces, and later the newly formed United States Air Force, launched investigations into the numerous sightings reported during the summer of 1947. Investigators from the Air Command at Wright Field, now known as Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, compiled over 100 reports and studied witness statements in detail. The initial military explanation for the Flight 105 sighting, along with other similar reports, pointed to common and familiar phenomena. Officials suggested that the objects could have been ordinary aircraft, weather balloons, birds, or even optical illusions. In the case of Flight 105, the timing of the sighting near sunset led some to argue that unusual lighting conditions and atmospheric effects might have played a part. A later official statement from the Bear Force concluded that the phenomenon was attributable to a combination of known objects and the power of suggestion or mass hysteria. Despite these explanations, the fact that the sighting was reported by a crew of experienced airline professionals left many ufologists and members of the public unconvinced. Over the decades, a number of theories have emerged to explain this UFO sighting. One popular theory among ufologists is that the objects were extraterrestrial in origin. Proponents of the extraterrestrial hypothesis argue that the extraordinary speed and unusual maneuverability of the objects indicate technology far beyond what was available to humans. This theory suggests that the sighting was a glimpse of advanced spacecraft visiting Earth. An alternative explanation is that the objects were experimental military aircraft. The post-World War II era was a time of rapid technological advancement in aviation. Both the United States and the Soviet Union were developing new types of aircraft and missile technology. Some researchers have speculated that the objects observed on the flight were secret military prototypes or test vehicles that were not yet known to the public. However, this theory has its weaknesses, as the objects were described as lacking conventional features such as wings or tails. Another view holds that the sighting was the result of a misperception or optical illusion caused by atmospheric conditions. At dusk, when the lighting is low and the sky is darkening, unusual reflections and mirages can occur. Critics of the extraterrestrial hypothesis point out that the official military investigation cited the possibility of such illusions as a plausible explanation. They argue that the human eye, especially under stressful conditions or in unfamiliar settings, can easily misinterpret common objects as something extraordinary. That said, this wasn't a sighting by just anybody. This was a sighting by pilots who had a lot to lose by going public with their UFO encounter. There's also a psychosocial explanation that suggests the sighting, along with the other hundreds of reports from that summer, was influenced by a collective state of excitement and expectation. The wave of flying disc sightings in 1947 coincided with a period of cultural and technological change in the United States. According to this theory, the widespread media coverage and public fascination with flying saucers created a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy. People were more likely to interpret ambiguous objects as evidence of extraterrestrial vehicles. Again, though, this is weakened somewhat by the fact that the witnesses were pilots. Unfortunately, given that this sighting happened in 1947, there's no photographic evidence of what actually happened. Imelda Keenan was a 22-year-old woman whose mysterious disappearance on January 3, 1994, has haunted her family and the Waterford community ever since. Imelda had settled in Waterford City after leaving her hometown in Mount Mellick. In January 1994, she was reported to be leading a quiet and content life. On that fateful day, she left her apartment on William Street at approximately 1:30 p.m. to run errands. Witnesses recall that she was last seen walking down Lombard Street near the Tower Hotel, where a local doctor's secretary, who knew her well, observed her crossing the road. When Imelda's family went to her apartment later that day, her belongings, such as her glasses and handbag, remained untouched, suggesting that she did not plan to leave on her own accord. Her disappearance was formally reported by her brother Edward the following day after she didn't return. The initial response by the authorities was to treat Imelda's case as a missing person incident rather than one involving foul play. The Irish police didn't conduct a thorough forensic examination of her apartment or the surrounding area, and only limited witness statements were taken. This approach led to widespread criticism from Imelda's family and advocates, who argued that critical evidence could have been overlooked. Several theories have emerged over the years. One of the earliest speculations was that Imelda might have run away. However, her decision to leave behind personal belongings casts doubt on the runaway theory. Her family's long-standing contact with her, along with the fact that her bank account remained untouched, strongly suggests that she didn't intend to disappear voluntarily. Another theory, which has gained significant support among her relatives, is that Imelda was slain. Her family has repeatedly pointed to the suspicious behavior of her fiancé, Mark Wall, who quickly distanced himself from the family and whose timeline of events has been questioned. However, he's never been officially named as a suspect in the case. In 2025, the 31st anniversary of her disappearance, the Irish police issued a renewed appeal for anyone with information to come forward. Automatic writing, also known as psychography, is the process of writing without conscious intention, often attributed to spiritual or subconscious influences. Practitioners claim that during automatic writing, their hand moves involuntarily, producing text that originates from the subconscious mind or external entities. Historically, automatic writing has roots in various cultural and spiritual practices. In Chinese folk religion, a form known as fuji involved using a suspended sieve or tray to guide a stick that wrote characters, believed to be messages from deities or spirits. In the West, the practice gained prominence during the 19th century with the rise of spiritualism, where mediums claimed to channel messages from the deceased through automatic writing. Psychologists have studied automatic writing to understand its origins and implications. Some suggest it results from the ideomotor effect, where individuals make motions unconsciously. Others view it as a manifestation of dissociative states, where the person's consciousness is divided, allowing hidden aspects of the psyche to emerge. In contemporary times, automatic writing is often used as a therapeutic tool to explore the subconscious mind. From an occult perspective, automatic writing is viewed as a profound method of accessing wisdom beyond ordinary conscious awareness. Practitioners often describe the process as a gateway to spiritual guidance or a connection with energies, spirits, or even higher realms of consciousness. They argue that the messages received through automatic writing often carry insights or knowledge that surpass the writer's usual understanding, suggesting an external or deeper internal source. Many believe the practice serves as a direct line to the subconscious mind, enabling individuals to bypass rational filters and tap into buried thoughts, emotions, or even latent creativity. For others, automatic writing is seen as a form of divine communication, where entities such as guides, angels, or ancestors transmit guidance or answers to pressing questions. Proponents also highlight the therapeutic benefits, claiming it facilitates emotional release and fosters self-discovery. Some report feelings of clarity, purpose, or spiritual connection after sessions, emphasizing the transformative power of the experience. However, critics argue that automatic writing lacks empirical evidence and is susceptible to the writer's biases and expectations. They further point out that the content produced often reflects the individual's knowledge and experiences, casting doubt on claims of external influence.